as Ariane mentioned, I'm going to talk about recent work we have done in Mozambique. So let me explain the setting. I'm going to talk about two studies, and I'm going to talk about them in a way that sometimes is going to be a bit sketchy. So please let me know if you have detailed questions. I'm looking at the chat box here, so I hope to be able to address them. If not during the presentation, at the end as well. Okay. So let me tell you a little bit about the setting here. So the setting is not very pleasant, I'm afraid. So we have been working in Northern Mozambique for a while, and the current situation in Cabo Delgado province is the following. So there's been a conflict situation. An insurgency began in late 2017. There is not so much detailed information about the causes of this insurgency. There is certainly a lot of information related to ISIS and to the problem of radicalization related to Islamists. But there is also a sense that there could be, and there should be probably, a lot of economic causes, and namely some of them related to natural resources. So this is a province that became very rich in recent years in natural gas. There was a big discovery of natural gas in this province, and suddenly a very remote province that was the end of the world, not very rural, very poor, even for Mozambican standards, became very important in this respect. And so to a certain extent, we are seeing here, my sense is that we are seeing here a lot, a lot of this is a fight for the control of the situation. To date, since 2017, more than 2,000 people died, and we have now 400,000 people displaced in Cabo Delgado province. So let me tell you a little bit about our research in this context. So the story here begins actually before the conflict started. So we had initial concerns over the sudden presence of substantial natural resources in this region. And we prepared a project, a large-scale project in this setting, testing the political mechanisms of the natural resource curse. I'm going to talk about natural resource curse in a bit, but the basic idea is that natural resources are associated with a number of deteriorating conditions in terms of development. And some of them actually could be conflict. Okay. So then, after conflict erupted, we started working with Muslim authorities in the region, and we tested specifically for the role of religious sensitization on antisocial behavior. I'll be very specific about what religious sensitization is in this setting and what antisocial behavior is as well, and how we are going to measure. But as you can see, it starts out our research as research on natural resource curse, and then we, because of the happenings in the province, we started working on conflict very explicitly. Let me tell you a little bit about the first project. The first project, it's entitled, we have a paper actually just published at the American Economic Review on does information break the political resource curse? So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about now. So what's the motivation here? So the idea that, as I was just mentioning, the presence of natural resources is harmful for development goes back, if we want, we can find something in Adam Smith's writings about that. So that has been in the minds of economists for a long time. And more recently, natural resources have been very clearly associated with conflict. I would say clearly in the work of Colin Doffler and later Ted Miguel and other people following. Many explanations have been put forward for this relationship between natural resources and bad economic outcomes. Some of them, of course, quite old, like the Dutch disease, but more recently, these mechanisms related to governance and to politics specifically. Generally speaking, there is still limited empirical knowledge about these mechanisms, and to a certain extent, that's what this work was designed to do. It was designed to understand better about the mechanisms of the natural resource curves that are related to political variables. In this paper, we focus on the anticipation of a significant resource windfall. That's what we have in Cabo Delgado province when we run this project. Political economy mechanism. Okay, so
yeah,
specific. Is it fine?
Yeah, it's working.
It's working. Thank you. And specifically, we are going to talk about the role of information in counteracting these curves. Okay, so we conducted a large-scale RCT whereby we test the impact of information to local politicians and the population at large. Let me be very specific about what exactly we do. So the research questions here in this project are what's the impact of information about the resource windfall when given to the population? Sometimes we are going to focus on specifically local politicians. We are going to talk about local leaders, chiefs of villages, typically. And sometimes we are going to talk about information given to everybody, communities at large. We are going to follow impacts on knowledge that people have about natural resources, then on elite capture and rent seeking, which is intimately related to the behavior of chiefs. And then we are going to talk about citizen mobilization, trust, and the demand for accountability, for political accountability. Finally, we are going to talk about violence. The main results here, and which is a little bit of a preview of what I'm going to tell you about. The main results here, and this is something that we clearly did not expect, even though in our pre-analysis plan we expected to touch on variables related to sense of security and in the communities, but we never thought about the possibility that full insurgency was going to happen. Still, our main result here is that information to the communities at large, and specifically when it goes to the communities at large, not when it goes to the chiefs, decrease the likelihood of actual violence. As measured by actual real geo-referenced conflict data, we use international data sets that are based on news events that are geo-referenced, and that's basically the state of the art in terms of measuring conflict. And we find actually effects of our information campaign, of the information that we follow, on actual violent events after 2017. So this is the main result. To a certain extent, it's something that we really it really surpassed our expectations to a certain extent in terms of the scope of this project. Then we go for the things that we were prepared to measure very well. So we have clear positive effects of all treatments on awareness and knowledge about the natural gas discovery. Citizens become optimistic regarding future benefits. The campaign was not necessarily optimistic. Bad cases that went wrong internationally, like parts like the Delta region in Nigeria, They were covered in the campaign, and so, but still we see a clear positive effect in terms of getting people a sense of economic opportunity. People were clearly getting this sense from the campaign. Then we see also that elite capture and rent seeking increases, but that is only when information is given to local leaders. So when the information just goes to the village chiefs, we see an increase in elite capture and rent seeking, which is basically the way we interpret this effect is in line with this simple idea that information creates accountability, but that's just when it goes to the whole community, not when it goes to the chief. Finally, community level treatments increase citizen mobilization, trust, voice and accountability. And many of these, so I shall say that many of these outcomes are measured not necessarily just through surveys, but also through, I'll be precise about those, even though I could speak about these for like 2 hours. I'm going to give you a couple of examples about the ways we measure these variables, which I think is innovative. So literature, I'm going to skip. If there is questions about that, I'm happy about coming back. So as I told you, Mozambique discovered substantial amounts of natural gas in Cabo Delgado, starting in 2010. This is the largest discovery worldwide since the 60s and 70s. I think there were just 2 larger discoveries at that point in time, one in Russia, the other in the Middle East. So it's a huge thing. So Cabo Delgado is remote. Mozambique has weak institutions, as reported by various organizations, very limited knowledge or participation of local communities in the process of managing the natural gas. And that was the big motivation for this project. In terms of treatments, as I told you, we are going to talk about 2 treatments here. So one treatment that gives information to community leaders only, and one treatment that gives information to communities at large. One version of this second type of treatment included participatory deliberation activities in small groups. Basically, people were setting up small groups of people at the village level, citizens, so regular citizens that were discussing the priorities for local public policy in face of this natural resource pool. Okay, so this is one version. I'm going to tell you that these participatory deliberation activities don't have, because that was actually a third treatment, they don't have different impact than just information. So I'm going to kind of leave it in the background. Okay, so the information was sponsored by a large coalition of institutions, including the local government at the province level, a newspaper, university, NGOs of different types, national and international, and that's that. We also tried to get on board the international operators of natural gas. We couldn't, but that was the only part that was missing here. Otherwise, we get everybody. So the information included was very simple, as you can imagine. This is rural Mozambique. We had to be very simple in terms of the message. So we are talking about the definition of natural resources, the legal rights of the population, the details of the discovery, and what are the best expectations about what's going to happen. That's the basic context of this campaign. So in terms of means of communication, of course, we had to be very careful about the language. There was a live presentation of a community theater in each treatment location, played by a team of 3 actors, basically a traditional family hearing about the discovery of natural gas on the radio. And there was a leaflet which was widely distributed as well with a summary of the information. So this is the leaflet in Portuguese. rights of the population in face of the natural resources, forecasts from the IMF about what's going to happen to the Mozambican economy. So that's basically what a summary of the information that was provided. These are some photos. This is a local chief, village chief reading the leaflet. We see a community meeting on the right, and on the bottom, a discussion in a deliberation group. So we are talking about 206 communities, which were defined as catchment areas of polling locations. So a little bit, I'm going to skip some of these details because these are probably too much for a small presentation. But you can get a sense here of the dimension of this project. So we were in the whole of the province of Cabo Delgado. As you can see, in all of the districts of the province. Nowadays, it would be impossible to do this, completely impossible to do this, because it's a war zone, most of these districts, especially in the upper half, in terms of north-south. In the northern half of these, it's basically a war zone. You cannot travel. So in terms of measurement, and here I could be speaking about this for 2 hours, so I'm not going to do that. So you are safe on that, no worries. But I'm going to give you a few details. So I'm going to talk about administrative conflict data sets, because this presentation is focused on conflicts, and we have used the two main ones, which are GDELT and ACLED. GDELT is only machine processed. ACLED, there is a human component in terms of verifying events. GDELT is basically where there is lots of events there, and it's just machines processing the data. So there are also lots of mistakes, and to a certain extent, I think whatever comes out from the two data sets together is probably the best standard we can adopt. Then we did baseline and endline surveys. We did these structured community activities, which are real life activities, in the sense that people were proposed specific activities that are, part of their lives. They seem normal to people. And then we are able to observe people's behavior in those activities. Okay, so that's, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Then we also did these lab in the field experiments, which are, of course, much more artificial. And that's why I'm distinguishing between 3 and 4. Of course, you could see that 3 are lab in the field experiments too, but they just seem less artificial. So it's a subjective classification that is here. So we did, in terms of what we are talking about in terms of timeline. So everything starts in 2016. We do the baseline measurements there. The treatment begins in early 2017, and then we do measurements later in the year. So as you can see, so conflict starts exactly, the first event is in October 2017 in one town called Mocimboa da Praia. There was a couple of other things, but at that time we were finished. We were just finished in terms of data collection. We were not able to do one thing, which is basically from the deliberation meetings, our commitment was to give back, of course, the deliberation of people to the district administrators. So we set up these meetings with the district administrators that were public. We were not able to do this for Mocimboa da Praia, where the conflict started. Otherwise, we were able to do this for every district as well. So the conflict data sets, I told you already about them. The surveys are quite simple and standard. So let me tell you about a couple of structured community activities that we did. So we wanted to measure elite capture as one important outcome. And one thing that was done was the community leaders, every community leader was given in private 8 roof sheets and told they were to be used in a way that benefits the community at large. And they had to be used until August 2017. And basically we followed the rooftops. Okay, so we checked after that where the rooftops were, whether they were used for private benefit or public benefit as they were told to do. Okay, so that is a measure of elite capture. We also do a very similar exercise with funds for meetings, in which these funds are meant to buy food items for meetings. We are also able to follow the money. Another measurement is this appointing a task force activity. So leaders were asked to select 5 individuals to be submitted a Ravens test. A Ravens test is, for those of you that don't know what Ravens test is, it's a non-verbal test measuring abstract reasoning. So basically, it's a better score is probably a sign that you are have higher cognitive skills. Generally speaking, of course, it's something very crude. And these leaders were told that conditional on performance of these individuals, they could earn a monetary prize for the community. So if the scores were higher than a certain threshold, they would earn a monetary prize for the community in general, which was a relative sizable prize. Those selected had a participation prize, which was very small. So we observed test performance for a community sample as well, and this is meant to measure elite favoritism, because if basically the chief could choose the friends or the family, they would earn the participation prize, but they are not necessarily the best people in the village to earn the big prize or the bigger prize in terms of for the community. So then we also had a measure of rent seeking, in which basically people were proposed a lunch with the district administrator. So there is a lot in the literature. That's why the literature it's interesting to review. There is a lot in the literature telling you that there is typically an impact in terms of increasing rent seeking after resource booms. It could be that there was something here like that. I don't think people ever tested empirically impacts of resource booms on rent seeking. We were trying to do that with an observational measurement activity. They were also matching grants to measure social cohesion, participation in meetings to measure community mobilization is very important. We also had a measure in terms of demand for political accountability, which didn't work very well, I'd say. And then we had field experiments. We had a trust game. This is quite standard. There was a novel game, which is this rent-seeking game, another way to try to measure rent-seeking propension. And we had the public goods game, which is quite standard as well to measure social cohesion. So these are all, very quickly, all the measurements we adopted. So let's go quickly for the hypothesis. So what's the hypothesis here? Faced with the campaign, Q1 for the leaders, C2 for C2 for the communities. Both local leaders and community and citizens become more informed about natural resources. And then the two other hypotheses, hypothesis 2, faced with public information, citizen mobilization, trust, and demand for accountability increase, violence decreases. Okay, so that's the big hypothesis that we have here, positive hypothesis. The other hypothesis is faced with private information, elites increase capture and rent seeking. And that's something that we also verify.
So just a quick interruption. So about yes. 10 more minutes before the Q&A.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just tell you this slide about the results, okay, on this one. So what do we see here? So these are, this is a summary of all the results in this paper. I'm going to focus your attention on a couple of things, okay? So this is T1 and T2. These are effect size. These are treatment effect sizes. So, so every line here that represents a confidence interval. If the confidence interval intersects 0, I cannot reject the hypothesis that the null hypothesis of no effect. If it doesn't intersect 0, I have an effect. Okay, so I have something that I can tell you about, and there is an effect of T1 or T2. So what can I tell you? I can tell you that if you look at, let's start with information. These are typically the first confidence intervals and size estimates. You can see that these are divided between community level outcomes and citizen level outcomes. You can see that for T2 increases information a lot, okay, especially for citizens with a lot of precision. That's in the right-hand side. For the leaders, it also increases. So T2 also increases for the leaders. T1 also increases for the leaders, but it doesn't increase for the citizens. It doesn't increase information for the citizens, okay, which is interesting. So information doesn't flow from leaders to citizens. So after that, I can tell you about violence. So violence, if you look at the first graph here, T2 decreases violence. That's the last one. That's the green in the last point estimate and confidence interval. It's lower than 0. It's a clear effect in terms of events, in terms of violence events. So T2, information to the whole communities, is working in terms of decreasing violence. That's the big result here. Then what explains these results? Then I have to look at the second graph, T2 there. So there is a number of positives there, okay? So you can see citizens' mobilization increases, trust and accountability increases, and citizens' perceived benefits increases as well. So these are the mechanisms, the potential mechanisms for this decrease in violence, okay? So these are this is a summary of what we show, and this whatever you see here. So each one of these effects it comes from an index of different indicators. Okay, so this is a summary of summaries. Okay, so let me. So that's what I wanted to tell you about the first project. Okay, so this is basically it. So let me focus. There is, of course, a lot I can tell you about these measurements and so on, and detailed results. But let me, let me focus on the second project, okay? So second project, this is after the conflict started, okay? This is shorter, it's a shorter note. This is after the conflict started. We sat with the Muslim Council in Mozambique, and we tried to think about what can we do, what can be done to prevent conflict from happening, to prevent young people from joining these rebel groups. What can we do? So of course, in terms of background, we know that Muslim radicalization is now associated with a large share of violent conflict in the world. And there is also a sense that religious principles could be specific drivers. So that is clear for Northern Mozambique. Although there is nothing in the beginning about religion, religion was in Mozambique was always very peaceful. Suddenly there is this. So it looks like religion is being used to mobilize people for an economic conflict. Okay, so that's what I told you in the beginning. And that's the way we interpret this context. Still, it could be very important in medium and long run in terms of maybe now it's not a religious problem, but it could be in the medium and long run. The newspaper, we focus on the evaluation of a sensitization campaign by Islamic authorities in Mozambique. And we contrast this. We had another treatment. This is also an RCT, in which we contrast religious sensitization to the creation of economic opportunities. You will see this is not a big thing. I'm not going to have effects from this creation of economic opportunities. It's going to be very, to a certain extent, this is a little bit of a placebo treatment, as I'm going to explain in a moment. And what I'm going to do, the main thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to measure antisocial behavior through a joy of destruction lab game. I'm going to tell you about the game in a slide. So that's basically it. Okay, so what are the main results? Because maybe the time is not enough to cover everything I would like. So religious sensitization causes a decrease in destruction of others' payoffs in the joy of destruction game. We see that clearly. This is not observed for the training module on entrepreneurship and employment. That's what I was telling you about when I'm talking about economic opportunities. However, this module on entrepreneurship and employment increases the belief that others will destroy payoffs, okay? Which is interesting, okay? So this is actually the largest effect we see in this project, okay? So this economic opportunity type intervention increases the belief that others will destroy payoffs, very strongly. We also see some evidence of public officials and foreigners being more targeted for destruction in the game, which is very in line with the happenings in Cabo Delgado. And we see positive effects of the interventions on trusting the state and negative effects of religious sensitization and support for extremism. Okay, but these are survey outcomes. Okay. So this is a partnership with the Islamic Council of Mozambique, which is a big NGO representing Muslims in Mozambique. The Islamic sensitization included what? Basically, Islam produced a manual where they deconstructed many of the most radical beliefs, namely that Islam, basically they were telling people that Islam opposes to violence. Okay, so which is that's the main one. But then there are many other items that were included in this manual as well that are not related directly to violence. The training on entrepreneurship and employment was basically a very simple training module, which was sponsored by Islam as well in coordination with the school, with the high school in Pemba, the capital city. And it was a very simple training model, very standard. So this is the type of campaign sensitization that we have here. So we are talking about the main Muslim sample here is run from 21 mosques in Pemba. We are talking about 241 people, males specifically, and relatively young. They are 18 to 44. Mostly in the 20s, okay? And then we had auxiliary samples of other people that were the counterparts when running the game. So what is this game? That's what I want your attention to go for. So this is an original design by Abing and co-authors. The game is played in pairs. Each player in the pair receives an endowment, okay, which is approximately $8. There's a choice between destroying half of the counterpart's endowment at a price for me. Okay, so if I want to destroy the other's counterpart, my counterpart's endowment, half of my counterpart's endowment, I have to pay 50 out of 10% of my endowment. Okay, I can also do nothing. And both players make the choice simultaneously, okay? So basically, I mean, there is no reason at all for people to destroy each other's payoffs, okay? So there is no point here, it's at a price. So obviously, the rational thing to do is to do nothing. But there is a clear proportion of people that destroy other people's payoffs. Okay, so we had each player from the main Muslim sample play against different types of people with another Muslim, a Christian, a public official, and a foreigner. We have in total 1,500 experimental decisions here in this project, and we incentivize beliefs about counterparts' behavior as well. So if people were right in guessing what the other person was going to do, they were earning a payoff for that reason. Okay. So we also had survey attitudes, as I already mentioned. So what do we find here? So let me basically focus. This is my last graph. With these, I think I can tell you almost everything. So what we have here, we have that the religious treatment decreased destruction, as you can see here is the first red. The economic treatment doesn't do anything, okay? And there is a clear difference between the two. This is statistically different, the effect from the religious treatment from the effect of the economic treatment, okay? And it's also interesting to see that actually the economic treatment has a large effect in terms of increasing the belief that the counterpart is going to destroy my payoff, okay? While the religious treatment doesn't do anything that I can tell you about, okay? I cannot distinguish that from zero. So then I could tell you a little bit about opponents, because there is a little bit of diversity, of heterogeneity in terms of how people behave regarding different types of opponents, Christians, Muslims, public officials, foreigners. Even though there is not a lot of action there, I can tell you also about the survey outcomes. So in terms of survey outcomes, there is a positive effect of the interventions on trusting the state. Actually, of the two interventions, of the religious and the economic, there is a negative effect of the religious sensitization on interest in politics, and there is a negative effect of religious sensitization on support for extremism, which is very consistent with this conflict prevention interpretation that we are taking from this result. Okay, so that's basically what I have here. Let me just, because I'm over time already 2 minutes, let me just give you an overall picture in terms of policy implications. So what we can see from one side to the other of these projects is that information sensitization directed at the communities works in counteracting the natural resource scarcity in the case of the first project, specifically in reducing violence. And we know that because these are real violent events that we are evaluating impacts on. And this is possibly because we were quite thorough. That was the big benefit of setting up this project in the very beginning. Possibly through, this happens possibly because of mobilizing communities and giving a sense of economic opportunity. Okay? So this optimism that came out of this treatment. In the second project, we see that religious sensitization could be a specific conflict prevention strategy in a context where religion is mobilizing insurgents. Of course, here we are not talking directly about conflicts. This is antisocial behavior measured in a lab game, even though then I have a little bit more in terms of survey attitudes. And this is an effect that we show that is over and above that of economic opportunity. You could think that, well, it's kind of a placebo economic opportunity that I have there. It's not a very strong treatment, but actually that treatment was able to change beliefs about behavior in the lab game, which is nice in terms of, interesting in terms of getting it some added credibility. So overall, this is very different, I can tell you, from what the government is doing in Mozambique. In Mozambique, the government, I could tell you also, could stay here 2 hours talking about Mozambique in general and how the government typically behaves in Mozambique. People completely closed the province since the conflict started. security, 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 army, army, army. The army is terrible in Mozambique, is not prepared, is really not helping. I think it's actually getting the population against the government. So it's a big mess. I think the government strategy in this setting has been actually counterproductive, okay? So to a certain extent, we are showing here, and we have been showing this heavily to the government as well, and a set of evidence that goes in the direction of, reaching to the communities, getting people informed, using, that's very important, using the local organizations to do conflict prevention, specifically the religious ones. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for giving
I'm
the
sorry
talk.
for
I think
being
it was it was a really, really interesting talk. And I do see a few questions in the chat actually, and I'll start straight away actually then. So we have one question asking about, does a highly diversified society also increase the chances of violence in a situation like the one in Mozambique?
Well, generally speaking, I'd say that even like if I look at the literature on the determinants of conflict, generally speaking, I don't see. So that's to a certain extent. So there is a paper back in time by Paul Collier and Anka Offler that is entitled "Greed or Grievance." Okay, and to a certain extent, I mean, it's an interesting paper. It's not a very strong paper in terms of methodology. At the time, was of course very influential, and but it's basically conditional correlations there, which is interesting and informative. But one thing that they show clearly is that most of the correlates of conflict are more related to economic variables than with respect to, for instance, diversity in the population. So when diversity matters is when you have a very important ethnic group which is kind of controlling everything, and then the others are small groups and they are being oppressed kind of by the big one. Okay, so that's the situation in which the structure in terms of diversity matters. But otherwise, generally speaking, these conditional correlations are not there. Okay, here in Cabo Delgado, we have, I think, to a certain extent, something that is important that I was almost telling you in the beginning, but then I thought maybe it is too much detail, is there is indeed a little bit of a divide in terms of ethnic groups. There is basically three main ethnic groups, and one of them is typically more associated with people in the city, more associated with people in government, and this is the people and the government specifically these are the people that are trying to dominate the province. The province was never dominated by the government. The government was kind of, very absent. But now they want to dominate because of controlling the natural gas, controlling the exploration of the natural gas. Suddenly they are very interested. And that, of course, creates a conflict situation with the people that were there before, that were actually doing trafficking of illegal stuff, timber, rubies, like lots of illegal stuff that was being trafficked in the province. And now suddenly they are challenged by this big presence of the government together with the natural resource operators. So that's, I think, the big reason for this conflict situation. There is a correlation here with ethnic groups. So ethnicity is kind of there. So again, I don't think ethnicity is the fundamental reason here. The fundamental reason is these different economic interests.
Thank you for that question. Answer that question. And we have one more here about, do the same results for leaders hold regardless of how long local leaders tend to stay in power?
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't listen very well.
Okay, so the question was, do the same results for leaders hold regardless of how long local leaders tend to stay in power?
Yeah, okay. So one thing that we tested that is very intimately related to that is maybe when information reaches communities, we would see a higher turnover of leaders. Okay, so that we tested that very, I mean, with a lot of hope, where we could see something happening there. We don't see anything happening there. Leaders in this context stay for a long time. The typical tenure of leaders in this setting, we are talking about around 10 years. So these people stay for a long time. Okay, so of course there is a lot of traditional type leaders, even though the leaders we are talking about are not necessarily the traditional leaders, because there is a state type leadership and there is a traditional type leadership in Mozambique. So this is the state type leadership, but there is an intersection sometimes. And of course, these people tend to stay for a long time. So we don't see a lot of action there.
Okay, and we have one more question in the chat now about if politicians benefit from citizens not having access to information, then they're likely to not implement the large-ranging civic education that would be needed to decrease violence. So, like, what are some sorts of ways where we can break through a gridlock like this?
Okay, can you say it again? I'm sorry, I lost it.
It's talking about if politicians benefit from citizens not being able to access information, then they're unlikely to introduce programs which would educate people. So what are some ways to break through this sort of gridlock or dilemma?
I think that's a very important question. To a certain extent, that's fundamental to the resource curse. Okay, so the resource curse is, so all the solutions for the resource curse that have been put on the table, and specifically the solutions that are more related to the political resource curse, are about, you know, politicians going against their interests. Okay, so that is a very important note here. That's why the resource curse is such a difficult problem to solve. I mean, that's probably in development. Of course, I'm a bit biased because I've been studying the resource curse since my dissertation, so I'm a bit crazy about this. But for me, it's crazy. It's like it's so difficult to get this because, of course, I mean, international institutions in resource-rich countries, they come in, they say, well, governments, you should behave differently. But governments look at international institutions and they, you know, why should I do what you are telling me to do? I don't depend on you. I mean, I have resources, so I have enough to fill my pockets. So it's a very difficult problem. What we have in this project is a little bit of we are trying to change a little bit the setting. Okay, how? We are using the local government. The local government is interested. Of course, there is clash between the local government and the central government. The central government doesn't give a damn about Cabo Delgado. The local government, of course, is interested in making sure that you know, there is a bargaining stake that is significant from Cabo Delgado. So clearly, the Cabo Delgado was interested. So the provincial government was interested in this information campaign. Not necessarily the central government, but for us it was enough to work with the provincial government. And then we are working with NGOs. Okay, and that's something specific and, you know, impactful that NGOs can do. And when we are talking about EITI or natural resource governance institutes, these are institutions that are doing, you know, NGOs that are doing stuff. But I'm not sure the stuff that they are doing is, you know, impactful like this. It's well defined. This is something well defined. It's an information campaign that went to a given set of communities. Is kind of recorded. Everything is very clear, and we are showing these matters. So NGOs could do a lot here. and using also government in a way that is, the possible way, which is a little bit of a midway, because the full way we cannot. It's a very difficult problem to solve. Okay?
If I may ask one more question.
Yes, Thomas.
I was curious how a more socialistic approach, no, not full on communistic, but a mild form of it, such as giving back to the community in a form of, infrastructure or monetary value. How would that impact the chances of conflict?
So what does impact conflict? Sorry.
So by a socialistic approach to the how to the use of the natural resources by the money that the government will make by selling the free resources, by investing that again in the local economy, instead of it going to the pockets of local politicians only. How would that influence the chances of a situation like this escalating into conflict?
So actually, the whole structure of Mozambique is quite socialist. It's, I'd say, socialist going wrong or going not socialist, but it's the structure is initial structure is socialist in the sense that the ruling party Frelimo was a socialist party in the beginning, and actually for the good and for the bad, I think. I mean, there is good too. Frelimo, the way they set up power in the beginning, in the fight against against the colonial power and so on, was really from getting a very strong hierarchy and very clear organization at the local level. So it's Soviet-like. Okay, it's really Soviet-like. That's how Mozambique works. However, of course, it went wrong later. Maybe not in the beginning, because the objective in the beginning was to secure independence and to stabilize the country, and that was achieved, and that was good. And to a certain extent, there is a lot of homogeneity in the country for that reason. I think is a good thing. What went wrong is, of course, corruption. So corruption is endemic in Mozambique. Okay, and that's basically the big problem here. So resources are likely to go to the hands of a few, are likely to go to the government, to the central government, and even Cabo Delgado will not see much happening. And that's a little fracture that I think can be used in policy making in terms of getting these better, because this alignment between the provincial government and the central government is not so clear. And to a certain extent, you're talking about socialism. To a certain extent, of course, here what we are trying is to give information to people. Okay, yes. So in getting these small deliberation groups, so it's really like the voice of people trying to be heard at higher levels, and we managed to do that. We managed to go from these little deliberation groups to the district level administrators, so which is below the province level. That's the level of politicians, and this worked. And I think when information went to the whole community, it worked in terms of conflict prevention. So that's the big deal in the first project. First project, that's the big finding that we have. So I'd say that if, of course, labeling these as socialist, I'm not sure I'll be 100% comfortable about that, but there is certainly elements of, getting some, opportunity to people and voice to people. And that in a so-called socialist structure, which clearly went wrong, is impactful.
No, but yeah, I understand. You know, one's voice being heard is a very important thing to a community. But if a voice is being heard but not listened to, then I can see people getting rather frustrated about that. So would it have helped if they would have seen more value for their well, not technically their money, but the natural resources situated on their land?
So I agree with you that of course frustration could be an issue in the longer run, and to a certain extent, what we are seeing in Mozambique is a lot about that. People are frustrated. These young people that are joining these insurgent groups, they are frustrated, and these religious radicals are taking advantage of that situation. That's what is happening. It's about frustration, lack of opportunity. There's these foreigners that are coming here. They are doing their stuff, but we don't see anything out of this. It's the typical story. I mean, this is not a new story. It's the same story in Cabinda in Angola, in the Delta region in Nigeria. It's the same old story. So it's a matter of frustration. What I'm telling you here is that giving information to people and getting these communities mobilized and getting a sense of opportunity could actually help in avoiding conflict. And not only in that, what I'm saying is that specifically dealing with the religion problem, the religious problem, the religious type mobilization of these young people using the local organizations would also be quite impactful. But in the longer term, of course, if there is no opportunities coming to these people, the problem will remain, and you are completely right.
Thanks very much for this very interesting talk. Gives me much to think about.
Yeah, thank you very much
Thank
for being willing to speak today and share your research with us and also answer our questions. And I think that was us at time as well. So unless anyone has any more questions, I think Professor Pedro Vicente also wants to head off, have his dinner, I'm sure, and whatnot. And
I was trying to read the chat box, but I was unable. I'm sorry, because sometimes it's a lot of writing and I cannot read this quickly. But thank you very much for your questions.